Hey, what's going on? Thanks for stopping by. What we have today is an OCD project. A few months ago, I ordered a PENN 704 Zulu online. When it came out of the shipping box, I noticed that one of the seals, or rather the only seal, was broken on it. When I was out fishing, one of the housing plate screws just popped right out of the reel. Upon further investigation, it turns out that the threads in the housing assembly were completely stripped out. So I believe it was this screw just popped right on out. That was a bit frustrating because this isn't a cheap reel, and I bought it brand new. I don't know if the folks at Half Hitch were messing with the reel, stripped out the threads, or if this was a issue with pin manufacturing itself. In any event, because of coronavirus, I think the quickest option for me was just to buy a brand new housing assembly. So that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna strip down this reel, clean it out, replace the old housing assembly, and completely rebuild the reel. That way, I have 3 perfectly good screws. But so far, it's been a great reel. These reels are known for their reliability and simplicity, as you will see in this video. Anyways, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you enjoy. Let's check it out. Now, just to clarify, I only had issues with housing threads for one of the housing plate screws. The other 2 screws that you see were perfectly functional. Now, there's the hole that I had issues with, and you can see there that the screw just goes in and out, so that's why it just fell out. All right, so we're gonna grab our reel, and we're gonna turn the handle assembly clockwise, just like so. And then underneath is a handle washer. So when we put the handle aside, we'll pop that washer out. Boom. All right, now we're gonna unscrew the drag knob. And then our spool assembly is free to come off of the spool shaft. And underneath there, we have our click tongue with spring. All right, we're gonna back out the 2 remaining survivors here. Those are housing plate screws, and then our housing plate pops off. And there's 2 dimples on it, and that kind of restrains the crosswind arm right there in place. There's the main gear, the pinion gear, and then down below here we have the crosswind screw. So we're gonna back that crosswind screw out, and definitely make a mental note of the orientation of the crosswind arm. That way when you reassemble it, it makes sense. Pull up on the spool shaft or the main shaft, and that frees up the crosswind arm off of the crosswind roller on the main gear. There are dimples at the top of that crosswind arm, and those face the plate. Turn the reel around, push out on the main gear shaft, and the main gear pops right on out. And then there's a ratchet and main shaft on the other side. All right, there's our anti-reversing mechanisms. We got the eccentric spring. That's the dog right there, which actually does the clicking and the anti-reversing. And the eccentric is just kind of the mechanism that activates it. I took a picture with my phone, a little bit better than a mental note. That way when I reassemble, I'm good to go. Next, we're gonna take a socket and back out the rotor cup nut. Now we have a rotor cup washer, and the whole rotor just pops right on off the main gear. And then boom, the rotor cup washer pops right on out. So be mindful of that, don't lose that while you're disassembling. And then we'll set aside the rotor cup and the washer. All right, now we're looking at the rotor brake, which is a black rubberized material. It has 3 indentations that fit over the bearing cover that we're looking at right here. We're gonna back out those bearing cover screws. And then if you notice, the bearing cover has a little ramp, and that's facing the handle. So I don't know if that orientation matters, but I always keep that orientation when I reassemble. So here's the very simplistic bearing, pinion bearing assembly. So there's the one and only bearing, and then there's your pinion gear on the left. All right, there's the kind of the housing for the pinion gear assembly. Next, we're gonna back out our dog. This is the anti-reverse dog. Sort of a mechanism that's gone to the wayside with modern spinners. And then there's the eccentric lever with sleeve. Now we're gonna back out that eccentric screw, and that should free up the eccentric on the other side. Now I believe that screw has a little friction washer on it, so don't lose it. And then there's the spring and eccentric. Next, we're gonna pop out the dog spring, and we'll set that aside. Here are the bushings. The housing assembly comes with those installed. They're kind of permanently installed. All right, I got my parts from Mystic Parts. Those are the housing plate screws. I just ordered 3 of them, so I'll have extra. And then here's the brand new housing assembly. Now these 704s are not like super tight tolerances. So those bushings may have a little bit of resistance when you first put it together, and then just through usage, it'll wear down nicely. All right, so I'm using a toothbrush, paper towel, pin oil, some Ardent real butter, a small flathead, and then the fat wrench set to 8 inch-pounds. So I'm gonna use my Q-tip with some grease. We're gonna grease up all the bushings and the pinion gear housing, just like so. We'll set that aside. Next, we're gonna service and clean the pinion gear. Use that toothbrush. We're gonna brush out all the teeth. Now with these reels, especially since the tolerances are so loose, you can really go wild with the grease. Don't be shy with it. And we'll clean up this bearing. I heard rumors online, reading through the forums, that old timers would like just pack the housing with just tons of grease, because they weren't worried about anything binding up. So now we're going to place that bearing back onto the threaded side of the pinion gear, and then that just slides right down into the pinion gear housing, and it turns, and looking good. Notice how the threads are up, just like so. I'm gonna throw a little bit of grease on the bearing cover, and I'm gonna orientate that ramp towards the handle. Next, we're gonna take our bearing cover screws and tighten down that bearing cover. And I'm gonna torque them down 8 inch-pounds with the fat wrench. So boom, there's our pinion gear assembly, all secured. Now we're gonna take our rotor brake, grease that up, and then it just pops right onto those little cams, or whatever you want to call them. Boom, just like that. So now our rotor brake is installed. Next, we're gonna clean out, lubricate the rotor cup, grease up the spool shaft channel there, throw in the rotor cup washer, oil everything up just for good measure, and then the orientation on the pinion gear matters for that rotor cup washer. I did a poor job here initially lining it up, so I'm having difficulties, but eventually I get it to line up there. There's 2 flat edges on either side of the pinion gear, so you just got to line those up with the rotor washer. Then I flip it around, push down on the pinion gear, and that'll expose more threads. That way your rotor cup washer will get some traction. So we'll just screw that on hand tight. Take our socket wrench, tighten it down hand tight. Don't get wild with it. I'd rather have a reel be slightly loose than totally stripped out, like I see on a lot of old reels I buy. Cool. Now this is the eccentric liner. I had to remove that off of the old housing and place it into the new one here. And that gives us good alignment with our eccentric lever. All right, there's our dog spring. And it goes on that little cam there. Boom, we'll press down on that dog spring, work it into place. And that's the orientation we're looking for right there. Grease up this little cam, or whatever we want to call it, knob. And we'll orientate our dog. And then that way it springs back. So that's the right motion we're looking for. There we go. Nice little close up. All right, next we're gonna work in our eccentric. I have to admit this was a lot more difficult. This is probably like my 4th attempt here. We're gonna grease up that eccentric in front of the camera. It's much easier to like hold this close to yourself and really work it in there. But we're gonna take your opposite hand, hold back that dog. So I'm using my left thumb here to hold that dog back against the housing, left side of the housing. And now we can drop in this little eccentric into its respective hole, and that cam should be up on top towards the rotor, and that dog is gonna rest on it and kind of hold it into place under tension. So I should release that dog here in a moment. Boom, it kind of holds that eccentric in place, and then that eccentric spring is right where it needs to be. So freeze frame, take a look at it. Now gently, I'm going to roll the housing assembly over while holding it down with my left pointer finger. And we're going to screw down the eccentric lever, and that should hold that eccentric in place. There's the eccentric screw with its washer. Tighten that down. Boom, now we're going to check functionality before we tighten it down all the way. And it appears to be correct. Now I'm going to finish tightening up the eccentric lever. Sweet, there we have it. Our anti-reverse system is installed. Sweet. All right, so here's the handle washer. We're gonna grease that up. All right, now I forgot to show it, but you need to insert the main gear back into the housing assembly. It's super easy before you install the handle. All right, let's get back to it. I'm gonna really grease up the handle assembly here on these reels. I'm not ashamed of using a ton of grease. And then we're gonna rotate it counterclockwise while we hold. We're gonna rotate it counterclockwise while we hold the rotor cup to tighten it down. So boom, I restrain that rotor cup, turn it with my right hand. We don't have to get too buck wild on it, just tight, nice and snug, and then we check functionality. All right, we're gonna clean up the crosswind arm, grease it up. With the dimples facing outwards towards the housing plate, we place it on the pinion gear, or the main gear rather, and then there's it sitting on the roller sleeve. Now I snuck it in there, but the main gear we popped in at some point. All right, so greasing up the main shaft. We're gonna pass that through the rotor nut, down through the pinion gear, and we gotta line it up with the hole at the bottom of the crosswind arm. Just like so. So that crosswind arm popped off. I apologize for not showing the main gear installation, but it's super easy. You just slide it right back into its respective hole. All right, so we're gonna pop over that crosswind arm, push it up onto the main shaft, and then we're gonna line up the crosswind screw hole. Grab our crosswind screw, and we're gonna screw it in and tighten it up. And torqued it down, and it's torqued, perfect. And here we can kind of see functionality. Don't be surprised if your crosswind arm pops off while you're doing this. Cool, now we got our housing plate. That pops on, covers all the internals. And now we can grab our brand new housing plate screws and tighten those down. You see how greasy this reel gets while cleaning. And good to go. These I did not over tighten at all because it came stripped. All right, now we're gonna look at our spool assembly. We're gonna service the drag washers. So we're gonna pop out this retaining ring. And there it is, there's the retaining ring. And then we're gonna pull out our drag washers. Definitely line them up in the order that they come out of the reel. That way you don't mess up the reassembly. So right there, I line them up as they came out. Really grease up, clean the drag washer housing. We're gonna clean up, grease each of our drag washers. That was a Teflon, so metal, Teflon, metal, HT100, or carbon fiber, metal, HT100, metal, and then the retaining spring. I can just push in with my thumb, and then we'll use a screwdriver to make sure it's sitting in its respective grooves. Now, your reel should come with a schematic, and it'll tell you which washers go in which order. So if you absolutely screw it up, you can always reference the schematic. All right, next we can just pop the spool assembly onto the spool shaft, and then we grab our drag knob. It's plenty clean, and we'll tighten down that drag knob. Now we're going to test the functionality of the reel. Should be fully reassembled by now. So up here's the anti-reverse was working. Boom, there it is. Spool's turning, or the rotor's turning, spool's going up and down. Now we got free spool, no anti-reverse, going back and forth. Boom, check the bail system. Shazam. Closed, no problem. And then I checked the drag system there. I fast forwarded it, but it worked as well. So there you have it. Thanks for stopping by. That's how you break down and clean the PENN 704 Zulu, and also repair it if you have stripped out threads. Anticipate seeing a review on this reel At some point, it is the off season here, so fishing has been slow, but eventually I hope to put out a really good review. Anyways, thanks for stopping by, and we'll talk to you guys later. Bye.